Welcome back, everyone. I am Julia, and if you are new here, this channel is where travel meets the heart. We explore the world not just through food and architecture and culture, but through the lens of human connection, desire, longing, and the way certain places make us feel alive in ways we cannot always explain. Today, we are doing something a little different. I spent the past year gathering stories, conducting interviews, and analyzing responses from women aged 18 to 65 from more than 40 countries. I asked them all the same question. Where is the most unusual, the most unexpected, the most deeply romantic place you have ever dreamed of being with someone you are deeply attracted to? Okay, I have to be honest with you. I have interviewed hundreds of women across 6 continents over the past 12 years as a travel and dating expert, and the one question that always gets the most passionate, the most animated, the most surprisingly candid responses is not about love languages or deal breakers or what they want in a partner. It is this one. If you could be swept off your feet anywhere in the world, anywhere at all, where would it be? And I promise you, the answers will absolutely shock you. And what came back was extraordinary. Not the obvious answers. Not Paris at sunset or a Santorini terrace. The answers were raw, specific, surprising, and deeply human. So let us travel together through the most unusual romantic dreamscapes women across the world have painted for me, one destination at a time. Settle in. This one is going to take you somewhere. Chapter 1. The Salt Flats of Bolivia. Salar de Uyuni Lake. Me start with something that genuinely caught me off guard the first time a woman described it to me. Her name was Valentina, a 34-year-old architect from Buenos Aires, and when I asked her where she most dreamed of having a deeply romantic experience, she did not hesitate for even a second. She said, "The Salt Flats, Uyuni, at dawn, when the water is only a few millimeters deep and the sky is reflected perfectly in the ground beneath your feet." I asked her to describe exactly what she meant, and what she said has stayed with me ever since. She told me that standing on the Salar de Uyuni in Bolivia, especially after rainfall when a thin sheet of water covers the surface, you lose all sense of where the earth ends and the sky begins. You are standing inside the sky. You are walking on clouds. There is no horizon. There is no up or down. There is only this infinite, silent, blinding white and blue world that makes you feel like the two of you are the only people who have ever existed. And when she said that, I understood immediately, because the Salar de Uyuni is not just a place. It is a sensory experience that strips away everything ordinary about everyday life. It is 11,000 square kilometers of absolute stillness and surreal beauty, sitting at nearly 3,700 meters above sea level in the Andes of southwestern Bolivia. The salt flat was formed from several prehistoric lakes that evaporated and left behind an almost perfectly flat crust of salt that stretches further than the eye can comprehend. During the dry season, it looks like a vast white desert, cracked into geometric hexagonal patterns that seem almost too perfect to be natural. During the rainy season, a thin layer of water transforms it into the world's largest mirror, and that is when the magic happens. Dozens of women I spoke to mentioned this specific image, standing somewhere so vast and so silent that the noise of your own thoughts finally stops, and you have no choice but to be completely present with the person beside you. There is no checking your phone. There is no ambient sound of traffic or other people. There is just wind, sky, salt, and each other. Valentina told me something else that struck me deeply. She said, "In a city, you are always performing. You are always aware of how you look, how you sound, who might be watching. On the salt flats, there is no one. There is nothing. You can be completely, embarrassingly, beautifully real." And that, she said, is where she most wanted to fall in love. Women who have actually visited Uyuni describe a kind of intoxication that has nothing to do with alcohol. The altitude plays tricks on your perception. The silence is so complete it feels physical. At night, because there is no light pollution for hundreds of kilometers in any direction, the stars are so dense and so bright that you genuinely cannot tell the stars in the sky from the stars reflected in the water below you. You are floating in the middle of the universe. Several women mentioned something almost mystical about the place. When you walk across the reflective surface with someone you care about, your reflection walks below you, mirroring every movement. It is as if the earth is watching you, recording you, holding you inside it. One woman from Medellin described it as the most intimate public space on earth because there is nothing to hide behind, and somehow that makes it perfect. The journey to get there is part of the romance. You fly into the small city of Uyuni or take an overnight bus from Potosi or La Paz. The approach through the Bolivian Altiplano, past flamingo-filled lagoons that shift from coral pink to deep red, depending on the algae and the light, past volcanic peaks and fields of strange cactus columns, makes the arrival feel earned. By the time you step onto the salt, you have already been changed by the journey. For the women I interviewed who had been there, Uyuni was not just a beautiful landscape. It was a place where the physical world conspired to make emotional honesty feel inevitable. And that, it turns out, is exactly what romance requires. Chapter 2: The Libraries of Trinity College, Dublin, and the broader world of ancient libraries. Now, I want to talk about something that surprised me even more than the salt flats. When I started noticing a pattern in my interviews, I almost dismissed it as a coincidence. But it was not a coincidence. A remarkable number of women, when asked about their most unusual romantic dreamscape, described libraries. Not just any libraries, specific, ancient, overwhelming libraries where the weight of human knowledge and time and story is so thick in the air, you can almost breathe it. Trinity College Library in Dublin came up more than almost any other single location in my entire research. The Long Room, to be precise. The Long Room is 2 stories of dark oak shelving stretching 65 meters from one end to the other, housing 200,000 of the oldest books in the library's collection. The ceiling is a long barrel vault of pale wood. The busts of great philosophers and writers line the shelves at regular intervals. The smell of old paper and wood polish, and something else, something harder to name, something like accumulated centuries, fills every breath you take inside it. One woman I interviewed, a philosopher and professor named Eowulf from Cork, described it perfectly. She said, "There is something about being surrounded by that much human thought and imagination and longing and creativity that makes you feel connected to every person who ever lived and also, paradoxically, deeply, urgently present in your own body. You feel the weight of time and also the gift of this exact moment." She told me she had stood in the Long Room once with a man she had been dating for only 3 weeks, and neither of them spoke for a long time. And that shared silence, she said, surrounded by 200,000 books and 2,000 years of human striving, felt more intimate than anything she had experienced in years. This is something I heard again and again from women who dreamed of romance in libraries. It is not the cliché of the bookish woman wanting a bookish man, though that certainly plays a role for some. It is something deeper. It is about the way an ancient library collapses the distance between past and present, between the person you are and the person you might become, between the smallness of an individual life and the vastness of human experience. And within that collapse, within that beautiful disorientation, the person standing next to you becomes strangely, urgently, completely important. The Biblioteca Joanina in Coimbra, Portugal, came up frequently as well. This 18th century library inside the University of Coimbra is breathtaking in a different way from Trinity. Its rooms are covered in gilded Baroque woodwork, frescoed ceilings, and exotic wood furniture inlaid with tortoiseshell and ebony. It houses 300,000 volumes and is widely considered one of the most beautiful rooms in the world. But the detail that women mentioned most often about the Biblioteca Joanina was not its appearance. It was the bats. The library has, since the 18th century, housed a colony of bats that emerge at night to eat the insects that would otherwise destroy the ancient books. The library closes each evening, and the bats come out. The staff lay leather mats on the antique tables each night to protect them from bat droppings, and each morning they are removed. The library has coexisted with its bat colony for 300 years. Multiple women mentioned this detail specifically, And when I asked them why it affected them so much, the answers were variations on the same theme. There is something about a system that has quietly, practically, beautifully solved a problem for 300 years that feels profoundly moving. It is sustainable. It is humble. It is working. It does not need to announce itself. And somehow, imagining sharing that strange, specific knowledge with someone you are falling in love with, standing in that golden room and knowing the secret of the bats, felt to these women like exactly the kind of intimacy they craved. Then there is the Bibliothèque Nationale de France's Richelieu site in Paris, and the George Peabody Library in Baltimore, and the Strahov Monastery Library in Prague, and the Admont Abbey Library in Austria, which is the largest monastic library in the world, and contains an extraordinary ceiling fresco by Bartolomeo Altomonte that covers every surface of the main hall in swirling Rococo allegory. Women who dreamed of romance in these spaces were not, I want to be clear, dreaming of something simple or frivolous. They were dreaming of a particular quality of connection. They wanted to be seen by someone who could also see the room. They wanted to share awe. They wanted to be small together in front of something enormous and ancient and beautiful. And they wanted, perhaps most of all, for the conversation to never have to stop. Chapter 3. The Trans-Siberian Railway, Russia and Beyond. I want to take you now to a place defined not by a location, but by a journey. And it is a journey that appeared in my research with a frequency that genuinely astonished me. The Trans-Siberian Railway. The longest railway line in the world, stretching 9,289 kilometers from Moscow to Vladivostok, crossing 8 time zones, passing through the Ural Mountains and the vast Siberian taiga and the shores of Lake Baikal and the steppes of Mongolia, if you take the branch line, taking approximately 6 to 7 days to complete in a single continuous journey, 6 to 7 days on a train. And women dream of being there, with someone they are falling for, more than almost anywhere else on earth. When I first started hearing this, I was curious, and then I was fascinated. And then I went and spent time interviewing women who had actually done the journey. And their descriptions of what happens on a long-distance train over multiple days are genuinely unlike anything else. Here is what they told me. The train creates a world entirely its own. You are neither here nor there. You have left one place and have not yet arrived at another. And the world outside the window changes constantly, and the world inside the train changes not at all. The same compartments, the same dining car, the same faces appearing and reappearing at the same hours, the same rhythm of the track. And within that enclosed moving world, something extraordinary happens to social dynamics. Normal barriers dissolve, not all at once and not dramatically, but gradually, the way frost melts on a window when you press your hand against it. Conversations that would take months to reach in ordinary life happen within hours on a train. By the end of the second day, you know things about your fellow passengers that their closest friends might not know. A woman named Yekaterina, a documentary filmmaker from Novosibirsk who had made the full journey 4 times, described it this way. On the train, there is nowhere to go. You cannot leave. There are no distractions, no errands, no meetings. The only thing to do is eat, sleep, look out the window, read, and talk to each other. And when talking to each other is literally the only available entertainment, you discover things about a person very quickly. She told me about a man she had met on the journey from Irkutsk to Moscow. They had begun talking in the dining car over a meal of borscht and black bread. By the time Lake Baikal appeared outside the window, they had been talking for 6 hours without stopping. By the time they crossed the Urals, they had moved through every topic either of them had ever cared about. By Moscow, she said, she felt she knew him better than people she had known for years. The train does something to time, she told me. 6 hours of conversation on a train is worth 6 months of dates in a city, because on the train there is no performance. There is nowhere to go afterwards. There is no safety net of busyness to retreat to. You are just there, and so are they. The specific romance of the Trans-Siberian is also deeply tied to the landscape. Lake Baikal, which contains roughly 20% of the world's unfrozen surface freshwater and is the deepest lake on Earth, appears like a vision out of the window somewhere around the fourth day of travel. In winter, it freezes to a depth of nearly 2 meters and becomes translucent blue-green, a color that has no real equivalent anywhere else on Earth. In summer, it shimmers silver under enormous skies. The train skirts its southern shore for several hours, and the women I interviewed who had made this journey described that stretch as one of the most quietly overwhelming experiences of their lives. Several women talked about the specific romance of the overnight portion of the journey, lying in a compartment bunk in the dark while the train moved through the Siberian night, listening to the rhythm of the tracks and watching the darkness and the occasional light of a distant village through the window. It is the most safe I have ever felt, while also feeling completely untethered from everything familiar, one woman from Berlin told me. And that combination, that feeling of being safe and lost at the same time, is exactly where I fall in love. Women who had not made the journey but dreamed of it described similar imaginings. The compressed intimacy of shared space, the long, uninterrupted hours, the landscape outside that kept changing, keeping boredom at bay, giving you something to talk about, to point at, to marvel over together. The dining car where strangers from dozens of countries gathered over tea and vodka and told each other their stories. The way the journey made you lean into the present moment, because the present moment was all there was. Chapter 4. The Cave Dwellings of Cappadocia, Turkey. Let me tell you about Fatima. Fatima was a 39-year-old landscape photographer from Istanbul who I interviewed at a cafe overlooking the Bosphorus. When I asked her about unusual romantic dreamscapes, she became almost shy before she answered, which was interesting because she was not a shy person at all. She said, "You will think it is strange." I told her that strange was exactly what I was looking for. She said, "I want to be in a cave, not any cave, a cave dwelling in Cappadocia, carved into the tufa rock, with a low ceiling and thick stone walls and a window cut through the rock looking out over the valleys and the fairy chimneys. I want to be there in winter when there is snow on the ground outside and the air is cold, but inside the cave it is warm from a fire and everything is stone and candlelight and the smell of wood smoke, and there is nowhere to be and nothing expected of us." I have thought about Fatima's answer many times since that conversation, because it speaks to something I have heard in various forms from women all over the world: the desire for sanctuary, the desire for a space that feels both ancient and sheltering, a space that has kept humans warm and safe for thousands of years, a space where the modern world cannot reach. Cappadocia, the region of central Anatolia in Turkey, was formed by volcanic eruptions millions of years ago that deposited layers of soft tufa rock across the landscape. Wind and water erosion then carved this rock into extraordinary forms: tall columns called fairy chimneys, vast underground cities, cliff faces riddled with natural and human-carved caves that have been inhabited since the Hittite era. The region's cave dwellings were carved and expanded by successive civilizations over thousands of years, used as homes, churches, granaries, stables, and monasteries. Today, many of these cave spaces have been converted into extraordinary hotels and private accommodations, some carved directly into the ancient rock with all modern comforts preserved within their ancient forms. But what draws women romantically to Cappadocia is not the hotel amenities. It is the weight and texture of the stone itself. Women described again and again the particular quality of silence inside a cave dwelling. The walls are so thick and so old that sound from outside is entirely absorbed. You exist inside the earth. The temperature inside stays constant regardless of what the weather is doing outside. The stone around you is hundreds of thousands of years old, and within that ancient, encompassing silence, human connection takes on a different quality. In a cave, you cannot pretend to be anything other than an animal seeking warmth, one woman from Ankara told me, laughing. And there is something honest and equalizing and actually very freeing about that. Whatever status or identity you carry in your regular life becomes irrelevant. You are a person. They are a person. You are both keeping warm. Everything else follows from there. The landscape of Cappadocia outside the caves is also central to its romantic pull. The valleys, particularly the Göreme Valley, and the Rose Valley and the Love Valley with its famously shaped rock formations are extraordinary at sunrise and sunset, when the light turns the tufa from white to pink to deep orange to red. And then there are the hot air balloons. Hundreds of balloons rise from the Cappadocian Plateau every clear morning just before sunrise, drifting silently over the fairy chimneys and valleys in the still pre-dawn air. Watching this from the window of a cave dwelling, or better yet, from a balloon yourself, looking down at the ancient landscape with the person beside you, is an experience that multiple women described as genuinely life-altering. One woman from Izmir told me she had been in a relationship for years that had grown comfortable and a little flat, and her partner had surprised her with a trip to Cappadocia. "We took a balloon at dawn," she said, "and we were so high and so quiet, and the world below us was so impossibly beautiful that we just held each other for the entire hour and neither of us said a single word. And when we landed, everything between us was different. Something had shifted. We had shared something that words would have ruined. The cave, the balloon, the ancient valley, the silence. These are not conventional romantic settings. They are elemental, and that, it turns out, is precisely their power." Chapter 5. The Floating Markets of Vietnam and Thailand. I want to shift direction now and take you somewhere entirely different in character, but equally powerful in its romantic pull. The floating markets of Southeast Asia. Specifically, the early morning markets of the Mekong Delta in Vietnam and the Dam Noen Sarawak floating market outside Bangkok, Thailand. When I first heard women describe these as romantic dreamscapes, I was genuinely puzzled. These are busy, commercial, noisy, chaotic places. Dozens of wooden boats crowded together on a river channel at 4 a.m, each one piled high with tropical fruit and vegetables and live chickens and hot soup and strong coffee, and things you cannot identify, vendors shouting, boat engines puttering, water sloshing, the smell of river mud and frying food and diesel and jasmine. It is not, on the surface, an obvious setting for romance. And yet, a woman named Lin, a chef from Ho Chi Minh City who had grown up visiting the Kai Rung floating market with her grandmother, described the romance of these markets with a precision and passion that completely changed my understanding. She said, "The floating market is romance because it is life, raw, unfiltered, working life. People who have been awake since 2 a.m. on a tiny boat surrounded by everything they have grown or made, selling it to other people who are also awake at 2 a.m, and everyone is eating and drinking and shouting and laughing and bargaining hard. There is no performance there. No one is pretending. And to share that with someone you love, to eat steaming noodle soup in a rocking boat at dawn while the mist is still on the water and the sun is just starting to come up through the palm trees, that is intimacy." Several women from Thailand and Vietnam echoed this. What they dreamed of was not the grand romantic gesture in a curated setting. What they dreamed of was being fully, messily, joyfully alive with someone and having that person be equally, enthusiastically, unselfconsciously alive alongside them. A woman from Bangkok named Pim told me she had a theory about romance and discomfort. She said that the places that feel most romantically charged to her are always places where some small degree of physical or logistical challenge exists. Not danger, not hardship, but mild inconvenience, mild unfamiliarity, mild sensory overwhelm. When you are slightly out of your comfort zone, she told me, you pay attention differently. You notice more, you feel more, and you become more aware of the person next to you because they are navigating the same slightly overwhelming thing, and there is companionship in that. The floating markets deliver exactly this: the low boat, the crowded water channel, the need to negotiate in a language you may not speak, the physical act of leaning from one boat to another to accept a cup of coffee or a papaya, the decision-making required at every moment. What do we try? Where do we point? Who do we follow? All of this requires presence. All of this requires communication. All of this makes two people lean towards each other, literally and metaphorically. And all of this happens while the sun comes up over the water and the world slowly turns golden around you. Chapter 6. The Observatories and Dark Sky Reserves of Chile and Hawaii. I spoke with an astrophysicist named Camila who works at the European Southern Observatory in Chile's Atacama Desert, and she told me something that I have been thinking about ever since. She said, "The most intimate thing two human beings can do together is look at something they cannot understand." She meant this literally. She was talking about looking at the night sky through a research telescope, or more accessibly, through a high-powered amateur telescope at one of the dark sky reserves that are increasingly being designated around the world to protect areas from light pollution. The Atacama Desert in northern Chile is the driest, non-polar desert on Earth and sits at high altitude with almost no humidity, creating some of the clearest, darkest, most transparent skies anywhere on the planet. The major international observatories, including the Very Large Telescope at Cerro Paranal and the Atacama Large Millimeter Array, are located here precisely because the atmosphere is so free of interference. On a clear night in the Atacama, the Milky Way is so bright and so textured and so dense with stars that it casts a faint shadow on the ground. Women who mention the Atacama or the Mauna Kea observatories on Hawaii's Big Island, or the Ioraki Mackenzie Dark Sky Reserve in New Zealand, or the Natural Bridges National Monument in Utah, shared a common thread in their descriptions. They were not dreaming of the telescopes exactly, or of the astronomy. They were dreaming of the particular quality of smallness you feel when you stand under a truly dark sky. Camilla described it as the ego death that makes love possible. A bit dramatic perhaps, but when she explained what she meant, it landed perfectly. In ordinary life, she said, we are the main character of our own story. We carry the weight of our identities and our ambitions and our anxieties and our pasts. But stand under a sky where you can see the Andromeda Galaxy with your naked eye, a galaxy containing 1 trillion stars that sits 2.5 million light years away, and something happens to your sense of yourself. You become, briefly, not a main character, but a small part of something incomprehensibly large. And in that moment, the person beside you becomes your only anchor to the human scale of things. They become, temporarily, everything. Multiple women described variants of the same image, lying on their back in a field or on a desert floor with someone beside them, both of them looking up, neither of them speaking, and feeling closer to that person than they had felt to anyone in years. Not because of anything said or done, but because of the shared experience of looking at the same incomprehensible thing and being equally humbled by it. One woman from Santiago told me that she and her husband had visited the Atacama on their 5th wedding anniversary, and they had joined a small group stargazing session with a local astronomer who pointed out galaxies and nebulae and star clusters with a green laser pointer while narrating in a voice just above a whisper. Everyone in that group was completely silent for 2 hours, she said. And at the end, my husband took my hand, and I felt like we had just experienced something religious together. Not religious in a church sense. Religious in the sense of being reminded that we are part of something ancient and vast and strange and beautiful. Chapter 7. The Hammams of Morocco, Fes and Marrakech. Let me take you somewhere warm now, warm in both temperature and culture. Morocco's Medinas are extraordinary places, ancient walled city centers with labyrinthine alleyways, the smell of spices and leather and rosewater and charcoal and mint, the sound of hammers in the coppersmith's souk, and the call to prayer from a dozen minarets at slightly different moments, creating a rippling cascade of sound across the rooftops. Women mentioned Morocco frequently in my research, but the specific location that appeared most often within Morocco was not a rooftop restaurant or a rose garden or a candlelit riad courtyard, though all of those were mentioned too. The location that appeared most often was the hammam. A hammam is a traditional steam bathhouse, a ritual space for cleansing that has existed in Moroccan and broader Islamic culture for over 1,000 years. The traditional hammam is a series of vaulted stone rooms of increasing heat and steam, and the ritual involves lying on a warm marble slab while an attendant scrubs away layers of dead skin with a kesamit and then massages your body with savon beldi, a black soap made from pressed olive oil. The experience is deeply physical, deeply sensory, and deeply surrendering. You cannot be anywhere but in your body. The heat forces presence. The steam fills every breath. The marble beneath you is ancient and smooth and warm. The ritual of the hammam, which Moroccan women have traditionally shared in community with other women, is one of complete openness and trust. Women who dreamed of romantic experiences in the hammam were not dreaming of the mixed-gender tourist hammams that have become common in riads across Marrakech, though those have their own appeal. They were dreaming of something more specific, the sensation of being physically cared for, physically honest, physically bare in both the literal and metaphorical sense, in a space where that vulnerability was normal and even sacred. A woman named Nadia from Casablanca told me, "In a hammam, you cannot be sophisticated, you cannot be composed, you are just a person, warm and soft and clean and tired. And to share that with someone, that unsophisticated softness, that is the most vulnerable and the most romantic thing I can imagine." Several women who mentioned Morocco talked about the riad courtyards in the evening as a companion romantic space to the hammam. A riad is a traditional Moroccan house built around a central courtyard, and the finest riads have been converted into extraordinary guest houses and private residences where the courtyard is filled with orange trees and a central fountain and zellige tile work and the sound of water. The walls are high enough that you see nothing but the square of sky above, and at night that square fills with stars while jasmine scents the air and mint tea steams in a silver pot on a carved cedar table. The hammam first, the riad courtyard after. Soft and warm and unhurried. Chapter 8. The Dolomites in Winter. Northern Italy. I need to tell you about the mountains, not the dramatic, famous mountains of the world, not Everest Base Camp or Kilimanjaro or even the Swiss Alps in their postcard-perfect Swiss way. The mountains that women described with the most consistent romantic longing were the Dolomites of northeastern Italy in winter. The Dolomites are a range of pale limestone peaks in the South Tyrol and Trentino regions, the result of an ancient coral reef that was lifted by tectonic forces to nearly 3,000 meters. Their rock has a particular quality. It is white and cream and ochre in the day, but at dawn and dusk, a phenomenon called enrosadira occurs. The peaks turn pink, then deep rose, then violent orange, then blood red, then purple, then gray, in a display that lasts 20 minutes and is utterly unlike anything else in the mountains of the world. Women who dreamed of the Dolomites described winter specifically. Snow covering the meadows and the forests of larch and pine, the ski runs empty in the early morning before the lifts open, the smoke rising from farmhouse chimneys in the valleys, the crunch of boots on packed snow, the cold air that makes your face flush and your lungs feel new and clean. And the mountain refuge huts. The refugee. The Dolomites are scattered with refugees, stone and wood huts set at high altitude that serve as stopping points for hikers and skiers. In winter, many of them are accessible only on skis or on foot. The simple ones have bunk beds and shared meals and fireplaces. The more elaborate ones have hot baths carved from the rock and serve wine from the Sud Tyrol vineyards and cook venison ragout and polenta. But all of them share one quality. They are warm in the cold and they exist at altitude, and the view from their windows is of nothing but mountains. Women described the romance of the refugio in very specific terms. You arrive cold and slightly tired from the journey up, and you are immediately wrapped in warmth, both the physical warmth of the fire and the social warmth of a small community of people who have all made the same effort to be somewhere extraordinary. You eat simple food that tastes extraordinary because altitude and cold make everything taste better. You drink wine or schnapps or hot chocolate. You look out the window at peaks that are turning pink in the fading light, and there is nowhere else to go. A woman from Milan named Chiara, who had grown up skiing in the Dolomites with her family, described the specific romance of being snowed in at a refuge during an unexpected storm. "We had been dating for 2 months," she said, "and we had planned to ski down before dark, but the snow came in so fast that the conditions became dangerous, and the refuge keeper told us we had to stay. We had no reservations. We shared a dormitory with 4 other people. We had nothing except what we had carried in our small day packs, and it was the best 2 days of that entire year. We had no choice but to be there completely, and the mountains decided for us, and we were grateful. The Dolomites in winter offer something that women return to again and again in their romantic imaginings: the feeling of being held by the landscape, of being small inside something enormous and beautiful and indifferent, of having all decisions simplified to the most essential: stay warm, eat, sleep, be here, be together. Chapter 9. The Fjords of Norway, specifically Nærøy Fjord and Geiranger Fjord. Moving north now, deep into Scandinavia, to a landscape that appeared in my research across all age groups, all nationalities, and all relationship configurations. The Norwegian fjords. Fjords are glacially carved inlets of the sea, narrow valleys of extraordinary depth and length cut into the coastline by glaciers over hundreds of thousands of years and then flooded by the rising sea. The Norwegian fjords, of which Nærøy Fjord and Geiranger Fjord are UNESCO World Heritage Sites, are among the most dramatic and beautiful landscapes on Earth. Walls of rock rise nearly vertically from still dark water to heights of over 1,000 meters. Waterfalls cascade from the cliff tops in threads and ribbons of white. Small farms cling to impossibly steep green slopes above the waterline. Eagles circle in the updrafts. And the water is so clear and so deep and so still in certain conditions that it is difficult to tell which way is up. Women who dreamed of the fjords described a particular quality of the light. In summer, which is the obvious time to visit, the fjords receive light for nearly 24 hours a day, and the landscape is lush and verdant, and the water glitters and the waterfalls are full from snowmelt. But the women who appeared most romantically moved by the fjords were, surprisingly, drawn to the winter and shoulder seasons. In winter, the mountains hold snow and the light comes in low and golden and horizontal even at midday, lasting only a few hours before the peaks swallow the sun again. The waterfalls slow to thin silver ribbons or freeze entirely. The water turns from deep blue to black. The farms close. The tourist boats stop running. And the fjords become places of profound, absolute, almost otherworldly quietness. A woman named Ingrid from Bergen, who worked as a mountain guide, described the romantic power of the fjords in winter in terms of contrast. In summer, she said, the fjords are beautiful and busy and joyful. In winter, they are beautiful and empty and serious. And serious beauty is the most romantic kind because it demands something from you. It asks you to be equal to it. Several women mentioned the kayaking experience specifically. Small sea kayaks are available for rent in the fjord towns, and paddling a kayak on the still surface of a fjord in the early morning, when the mist is on the water and the reflections of the cliffs are perfect in the glass-smooth surface, and the only sound is the dip of your paddle, is an experience that women described with something approaching reverence. We went out at 5 a.m. because we wanted to be on the water before any other boats, one woman from Amsterdam told me. The fog was so thick we could barely see the cliffs above us, but we could hear the waterfalls. We paddled in complete silence for almost an hour. And then the fog started to lift and the cliffs appeared above us, higher and higher, and we just stopped paddling and held our paddles across our laps and looked up. And I cried. I am not a crier. But the scale of it, and the silence of it, and having him right there in the kayak beside me, it was too much in the most beautiful way. Chapter 10. The Traditional Onsen of Rural Japan. Japan appeared in my research more frequently than any other single country when it came to unusual romantic dreamscapes. And within Japan, the location that women returned to most often was not Tokyo with its electric streets and extraordinary food culture, though that was certainly mentioned. The location women described with the most consistent longing was the traditional onsen. An onsen is a Japanese hot spring bathhouse, fed by geothermal water and used for bathing and relaxation. Japan sits on the Pacific Ring of Fire and has more than 27,000 hot springs across its islands, and the onsen tradition goes back at least as far as the 5th century. The onsen experience ranges from elaborate hotel facilities in major resort towns to simple outdoor baths in remote mountain locations, accessible only on foot or by a single-lane mountain road that takes 2 hours to drive. It is the remote outdoor onsen, the Rotenborough in the mountains, that women dreamed of most specifically. Imagine this. a small pool of steaming mineral water carved from natural rock, surrounded by cedar and maple trees at the edge of a mountain stream. In winter, snow falls silently into the water and melts before it touches the surface. In autumn, the maples burn orange and red, and the leaves drift down into the steam. The water is the precise temperature of warm contentment, neither hot nor cool, and you sit in it up to your shoulders, in the open air, with the mountain forest breathing around you. A woman named Yuki from Kyoto described the particular romantic quality of the Rotenburo with great precision. She said, "In the onsen, all hierarchy dissolves. You have no clothes, no title, no phone, no role. You are just a body in warm water, like the most basic, ancient human version of yourself. And there is something about that shared physical simplicity, that shared nakedness of the ordinary self, that creates conditions for real connection." She told me that the practice of going to an onsen together, the journey to reach it, the ritual of washing before entering, the shared silence in the water, the post-bath feeling of being warm and loose and completely at peace, was her clearest image of what intimacy actually looks like. Not candlelight and wine, though she liked those too, but hot water and silence and the sound of a mountain stream and two people being simple together. Women who discussed Japan also mentioned the specific quality of an onsen ryokan, a traditional Japanese inn attached to a hot spring, where you sleep on a futon on tatami mats and are served an elaborate multi-course dinner in your room by a woman in kimono, and wake the next morning to find the futon has been put away, and a breakfast of grilled fish and miso soup and pickled vegetables and steamed rice has been laid out in its place. The ryokan experience was described repeatedly as the most perfectly curated environment for intimacy because it does everything for you. Every decision, every logistical concern, every question of where to eat or what to do has been answered. The only thing left to do is be present with the person across the low table from you as the steam rises from your teacups. Chapter 11. The Night Markets of Taiwan, Shilin and Beyond. I want to come back to something Pim said about the romance of mild discomfort and sensory overwhelm, because it opens a door to a category of romantic dreamscapes that is completely unlike anything we have discussed so far. The Night Markets of Taiwan. Shilin Night Market in Taipei is the most famous, but women who mentioned night markets in their romantic imaginings were not always referring to specific markets. They were referring to a mode of being in the world that night markets represent. A Taiwanese night market is a nightly gathering of street food vendors, game stalls, clothing sellers, fortune tellers, and people, hundreds and thousands of people, spreading across streets and alleys in a city or town in the evening when the temperature drops and the lights come on and the smell of stinky tofu and grilled corn and oyster omelets and fresh-cut mango fills the humid air. They are loud and crowded and disorienting and endlessly stimulating. A woman named Mei Ling from Tainan, a city known for having Taiwan's most extraordinary food culture, described the romance of the night market in purely sensory terms. "Everything happens at once," she said. "You have to hold hands just to not lose each other. You are making decisions together constantly. Do we try this? Is that line too long? Do you like the smell of that? Do you want to sit or keep walking?" And every 10 seconds something new appears that delights or disgusts or confuses you. You are completely together and completely present because the market demands it. She described a specific memory with a person she had dated, being in Tainan's night market on a rainy night, sharing an umbrella that was too small, holding her food in one hand and the umbrella in the other, trying to navigate a crowd of people who were also holding umbrellas and being jostled and laughing at the absurdity of it all. "We were slightly wet and slightly lost, and our food was getting cold, and we were laughing so hard we could barely eat," she said, "and it was one of the best evenings of my life." This is a theme that appeared throughout my research in many different forms. The romantic power of shared laughter at shared inconvenience. The intimacy of navigating something chaotic or difficult or just slightly overwhelming together. The way the night market strips away the self-consciousness that plagues so many romantic encounters in more curated settings and replaces it with spontaneity and joy, and the particular grace that comes from not taking yourself too seriously. Several women from different Asian countries mentioned the specific romance of feeding each other street food in crowded markets, the casual intimacy of the gesture, the trust involved in accepting food from someone else's hand, the pleasure of watching someone's face when they taste something extraordinary. Chapter 12. The Ancient Ruins at Dusk, Petra, Angkor, and Beyond. I want to spend some time now with a category that might seem obvious, but is, in its specific details, far from what you might expect: ancient ruins. But not in the way you are probably imagining. The women who dreamed of romance among the ancient ruins of the world were not dreaming of the Instagram moment. They were not dreaming of posing in front of the treasury at Petra or the towers of Angkor Wat. They were dreaming of something much more specific and much harder to achieve: being there when almost no one else is. Petra, the rose-red city of the Nabateans carved into the sandstone cliffs of southern Jordan, has a way of accessing the ruins at dusk that few visitors know about. After the main site closes for the day, a limited number of visitors can access the treasury by candlelight on certain evenings, walking the dark Sick Canyon by the light of hundreds of small candles placed along the path, arriving at the treasury to find it illuminated entirely by candlelight and a Bedouin musician playing the rababa, a traditional two-stringed instrument, while sitting in the silence before the enormous carved facade. Women who described this experience, or who dreamed of it, used language that was almost devotional. "It erases you," one woman from Amman told me. "You forget about your career and your apartment and your problems and your phone and everything that makes up your daily identity. You are just a person standing in front of something 2,000 years old, in the dark, in the desert. And you think about how many people stood in this exact place and loved each other and worried about their children and grew old and died. And all of that is gone now, but this carved stone is still here. And the person beside you is alive and warm and real. And that fact becomes enormous." Angkor, the temple complex of the ancient Khmer Empire in northwestern Cambodia, produces a similar effect, particularly at the smaller, less visited temples. The main temples, Angkor Wat and the Bayon, are extraordinary but crowded. The smaller temples like Ta Prohm, which is being left partially consumed by the massive roots of strangler figs and silk cotton trees, and Preah Khan with its long pillared corridors, and Banteay Shray with its intricate pink sandstone carvings, are quieter, more intimate. A woman named Sophia from Phnom Penh described wandering through the outer halls of Preah Khan in the late afternoon with a man she was falling in love with. "The light comes through the broken sections of the roof in vertical columns," she said, "and the stone is covered in moss and lichen, and the carvings on the walls are half eroded and half perfect, and the forest is growing through some of the walls. And we just walked slowly and quietly and touched the carvings and looked at each other, and we didn't need to say anything because the place was saying everything." The common thread through all of these accounts of romance among ruins is the way that antiquity reorganizes human priorities. In the presence of something genuinely ancient, the small negotiations and performances of daily romantic life, who texts first, what to wear, how to seem interesting, what to reveal and what to conceal, all of this becomes trivially, mercifully unimportant. The ruins remind you that you are alive and temporary, and that the person beside you is also alive and temporary. And that fact is both humbling and intoxicating. Chapter 13. The Glaciers and Ice Caves of Iceland. Last destination, and I have saved it for last, not because it is the most exotic or the most photographed, but because the women who described it to me were the most quietly certain in their descriptions. They spoke about it not as a fantasy, but as a conviction. Iceland. Specifically, the ice caves inside the Vatnajökull Glacier, and the volcanic hot springs of the Vestfjords, and the black sand beaches of the south coast, and the northern lights. What is it about Iceland that draws the romantic imagination so powerfully? A woman named Sigridur from Reykjavik, a marine biologist, told me she thought she understood her own country's romantic appeal from the outside better than most Icelanders. She said, "Iceland is a place where fire and ice coexist literally. The same island has active volcanoes and permanent glaciers. The same island can be dark for 20 hours in winter and light for 24 hours in summer. Everything is extreme and everything is in balance. And I think people sense that this place holds contradictions in a way that nothing is pretending to be something it is not, and that makes them feel like they can be the same way. The ice caves inside Vatnajökull, Europe's largest glacier, form each winter when meltwater creates tunnels and chambers within the ice. The ice of these caves is genuinely blue, a deep, intense sapphire that you cannot fully process as a natural color because it seems too deliberate, too saturated to be real. The walls are curved and smooth and translucent, and the light that comes through them is soft and blue and seems to come from inside the ice itself. Women who had been inside these caves described a silence that they struggled to find words for. Not the silence of emptiness, the silence of substance. The silence of millions of tons of ancient ice all around you, pressing the world outside to nothing. Inside the glacier, the world is entirely blue and entirely quiet, one woman from Copenhagen told me. And you feel held. You feel contained inside something cold and ancient and extraordinary. And the person beside you is the only warm thing, the only living thing, the only moving thing, and they become very important in that context. Several women mentioned the Northern Lights specifically, not the Iceland version, but the general category of aurora borealis that can be seen from Iceland, Norway, northern Finland and Sweden, northern Canada and Alaska, and even Scotland in strong solar storm events. The Northern Lights are not constant or predictable or reliable, which is part of their power. You cannot book them. You can only put yourself in a place where they might appear and wait. Women described the specific romance of the waiting. Standing in a field in the Icelandic dark in winter, the temperature well below zero, wrapped in every layer available, watching the sky. Sometimes nothing happens, and you go back inside cold and a little disappointed, and maybe a little giddy from the cold and the absurdity of standing in a frozen field watching for something that might not come. And sometimes the sky tears open in green and purple and white, shifting and folding in on itself in patterns that your brain cannot categorize because it has no template for them. We stood watching for 3 hours, one woman from Lisbon told me. We were so cold that we were just standing pressed against each other for warmth, and my neck hurt from looking up, and then they appeared, and we did not move for 40 minutes. We just stood there with our necks tilted up, completely still. And afterwards, we ran back to the car laughing like children, and we couldn't stop laughing, and it was the purest joy I have ever felt with another person. Conclusion. So we have traveled together today from the salt flats of Bolivia to the ice caves of Iceland. We have been inside ancient libraries and cave dwellings and mountain refuges and glaciers and floating markets and fjords and onsen and ruins and starlit deserts. We have met Valentina and Auifa and Yekaterina and Fatima and Lynn and Chiara and Ingrid and Yuki and Mei-Ling and Sophia and Sigrider and so many others. And if there is a single thread running through all of their voices, all of their unusual dreamscapes, it is this. The places where women most powerfully dream of romantic connection are not places designed for romance. They are places designed for something else entirely, for commerce, for prayer, for science, for transportation, for agriculture, for bathing. They are places where the ordinary world is interrupted, where the usual social scripts stop working, where you are forced into presence, into simplicity, into honesty. What women dream of, it turns out, is not candlelight and roses. What they dream of is a world made suddenly, temporarily, beautifully strange. And inside that strangeness, a person who is also awake to it, also moved by it, also changed by it, a person to be present with. In the blue ice, in the ancient silence, on the moving train, under the stars. That, and not much more than that, seems to be what we are all looking for. I am Julia, and I will see you on the next journey.